this discussion is about voting with your feet. And, you know, I almost voted with my feet and moved to New Hampshire years ago. I know. I regret it because I moved to Connecticut and they've already raised my taxes twice since I moved there. And, you know, a lot of people come to New Hampshire because they want to get out of a state income tax or a sales tax, and they want to be freer. But they don't get away from the federal government. And so what happens if people really vote with their feet and don't just leave a state to go to New Hampshire that's somewhat less oppressive than the state that they left, but they decide to actually leave the country completely? Now, I was joking. I was having lunch with a prospective gubernatorial candidate here in your state, and we were talking about the prospect of secession, which would be very interesting, because if this was a country, I would definitely move here. Because if New Hampshire was its own country, it'd be like the Liechtenstein, right, of the United States, or the Monaco, right? Because it'll be a little enclave of capitalism in a sea of socialism, and everybody would prosper, you know, and you'd get out from under the debt. You wouldn't, you know, because if you leave the country, you know, the debt stays with the United States. Now you can even say, look, we'll take our share of the debt if you let us go peacefully, and then just default. I mean, what are they going to? What are they going to do? So, but the question is, you know, will New Hampshire have the guts to do something like that? Because the last time a few states tried to secede, it didn't go very well. And, you know, we got a lot more sophisticated weapons now, so I don't know how it would work this time around. Yeah. But apart from that, right, what happens if people leave? And, you know, all four of my grandparents were immigrants. So I'm a second generation born in America. And why did my parents come here? I mean, my grandparents, why did they come here? They came here because they were looking for freedom. When they came here, there was no income tax. There was no Social Security tax. There were pretty much no taxes to speak of. There were some tariffs, but I mean, who cared about those? I mean, it was no big deal. So they were free. I mean, my grandparents came here, didn't even speak English. And there was no welfare workers. When they showed up on Ellis Island, there was nobody there to meet them. There was no welfare. There was no food stamps. If they didn't have a job, they didn't eat. Yet they managed to succeed. And why did they leave where they were? Because they didn't have the freedom and the opportunity that we had here. See, immigrants weren't a problem. See, we had a lot more immigrants coming to this country 100 years ago than we do now. They were flooding in. But it was great. There was no, I mean, you know, when I ran for the U.S. Senate, that was always a big hot button issue. Every time I spoke, I always was getting questions about the immigrants. And it's still a big issue today in the presidential debates. But anyway, this immigration is a big deal. And I never liked the immigration topic because I always thought it was a scapegoat. People trying to blame the immigrants for our problems. And we had a lot more immigrants, as I said, 100 years ago, and it wasn't a problem. It was great. The difference is the immigrants that came here when my grandparents came for opportunity. There are people coming now coming for a handout. And that's the problem. It's not the immigrants. It's the social welfare state that is making the problem a problem. But the reality is a lot of the immigrants that are coming here are working. I had someone on my radio show just yesterday, and if you don't know, I have a radio show called the Peter Schiff Show, and I have this show every 2 hours a day at schiffradio.com, so tune in. It's free, and if you can listen live or you can listen to it delayed. But anyway, she went undercover working in California picking fruit. And I asked her, you know, I said, well, were there any other Americans out picking fruit with you. She said, no, I was the only one. Because everybody else was Mexican. And the only reason she took the job was because it was part of her research for her book. I asked her, did they think it was odd that an American was actually taking his job? And this was in California at a time when the unemployment rate was over 10%. Yet no one in America would actually go and even interview for a job. Why would they bother when they can get unemployment benefits? Why pick fruit in the hot sun when you can collect unemployment benefits in the shade? But she went out there just for research, looking for work. So a lot of the immigrants that are coming here are actually a net benefit. I mean, probably if you can push a button and make all the immigrants disappear, illegal and legal, we'd be in big trouble. People talk about immigrants taking our jobs. There are a lot of people that wouldn't have jobs if it wasn't for illegal immigrants. A lot of people in California, a lot of mothers wouldn't be able to work if they had to pay for child care at the rates that the Americans would charge. And in fact, there are a lot of companies that if they didn't have the illegals, they would have to shut down. And so a lot of the legals who have decent jobs would lose them because we'd end up importing the products instead without that labor. So people don't understand the contribution that some of the immigrants are making. Not that others are not a drain. But the problem is that some of them are coming here for a handout and not opportunity, like my grandparents. But we are not the country that my grandparents came to. I mean, not even close. Many countries around the world are freer than America. We have high taxes. There are many countries that have lower taxes than we do. And we have a lot of government, and we have a huge deficit, which means the likely path of taxes in the future is up. I mean, we have a lot of debt. And if we don't default on it or inflate it away, someone's going to have to pay it. And that's going to mean higher taxes, particularly for younger people. Because the younger people in their 20s, 30s, they're the ones that are left holding the bag for the Social Security Ponzi scheme. You've got generations of Americans who are expecting you to support them. In addition, you've got to pay interest on the debt. You got to pay for the national defense. So it's not going to leave much left over, right, for people to spend on themselves. Plus, a lot of young Americans are entering the workforce with mortgages, with no houses. They have student loans, $50,000, $100,000. I had a young lady on my show, had a 4-year degree in sociology, and $190,000 in student loans to get a sociology degree. Of course, she can't even get a job with that degree, but she's got these loans. So you've got a lot of generations of Americans who are stuck with loans that they can never repay. There's not a lot of good jobs out there, and if they get a job, a good chunk of their money is going to go to the government, and a bigger chunk is going to go to the government in the future. And of course, we're not really attracting anymore as many of the types of immigrants like my grandparents, because we don't have that comparative advantage in freedom. We have less freedom, we have higher taxes than a lot of other countries. And at minimum, we're about the same. I mean, we're not much different than Europe. But at one point, we had such a massive lead, it wasn't even close how much freer people were. And that's why America became so wealthy. It wasn't an accident that we became wealthy. We became wealthy for a reason. We embraced freedom and liberty and capitalism like no other country in the history of the world. And that was responsible for our wealth and for our success. Unfortunately, we abandoned those principles in the 20th century, and we're suffering for it now.